Today I want to invite your attention to a familiar passage of Scripture, and that is the Gospel according to Mark chapter 5, beginning at verse 25. Gospel according to Mark chapter 5, beginning at verse 25. Very familiar passage of Scripture. And it reads as follows from the New Revised Standard Version. There was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched me?" And Jesus and his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. Jesus said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." I want to talk for a few minutes today about enough. Enough. There comes a point in all of our lives where we find ourselves saying enough. We will sometimes elongate the phrase and say, "Enough is enough." We reach the point where we have taken all that we can take of life's blows and setbacks and difficulties and disappointments and stressors on the job and stressors in our homes and in just the stress of living. Sometimes we find ourselves at the breaking point where we say, "Enough is enough. I'm tired of being mistreated. I'm tired of being devalued. I can't take any more of this. I need some kind of relief, because if not, I'll go crazy." And sometimes life experiences are so overwhelming that we find ourselves in an emotional state of frenzy, refusing to go through whatever it is again. We find ourselves declaring, "Enough is enough." This sister in the text that I read today was at her breaking point. She had had enough. Enough of suffering, enough of depression, enough of being excluded, enough of being taken advantage of. This sister had had enough. For you see, she had a medical condition, a condition that made her unclean and impure. The condition caused her to bleed. In fact, scholars suggest that her monthly menstruations never ceased. She lost blood every day. She had not asked for this condition, neither had she wished for it. The condition simply found her, and in fact, it stayed with her for 12 long years. But the woman was fortunate enough to hire the nation's top gynecologists and internal medicine specialists, the most notable, well-known medical researchers. She had hoped that they would find a cure for her rare condition. Instead, they exploited her. They found a reason to keep her coming back. They used her for medical research and left her more broken and more helpless than before. Trying to find wholeness, this woman depleted her retirement savings. For 12 years, she had taken out early withdrawals. Her IRA account balance was now at zero, and the IRS had taxed the money that she had taken out. Her financial advisor had no more advice to give her because she had cashed in all of her stocks and all of her bonds. Every night, this sister watched the Dow Jones report in tears because she was financially bankrupt. She was bankrupt because she was trying to find wholeness. Because of her medical condition, she was isolated. Her neighborhood constantly watched her. Her so-called friends and people in her community and the street community looked at her and they called her nasty. They called her stinky and foul and impure and unclean. They said that she smelled like rotten fish, and no one wanted to be around her. No one looked her in her face. She was an outcast in a bad situation. She longed to experience a human touch. She longed to be like everyone else. She had not heard her name called by anyone. In fact, in the story that we read here in Mark chapter 5, and even in the other Gospels, no one ever calls her by her name. People refer to her as that woman with an issue of blood. And because of her condition, everything she touched became unclean. She was a health risk. She was the kind of woman that the CDC would tell you to stay away from and to make sure you wear your mask when around her, because if she touches you, you then would become unclean, thus jeopardizing your entire family. This sister lived life with high stress and high anxiety, just like many black women today, stressed out to go in public, stressed out to speak to anyone, stressed out in her quest to find wholeness. This sister had had enough of suffering, enough of medical bills, enough of brokenness, enough of being used, enough of being the joke in the room. This sister had had enough. This woman's condition created a cash cow for the Palestinian Medical Society. For as long as this woman was sick and as long as she was in need, the rich people profited off of her condition. This woman lived in a community that profited off of her misfortune. She was sick, she was helpless, she was powerless, she was broke, and she was at the mercy of her community. And the people who could help her were the very people who were getting rich off of her condition. They were taking her money and leaving her worse off. Here you have this woman who is an upper class woman, and we know that because she had money to hire doctors. And in the ancient world, you couldn't hire a doctor if you didn't have the financial means. But this woman had a lot of money. She just didn't have some money, but she had a lot of money. And we know that because the text says she saw not just one physician, but verse 26 says that she saw many physicians. And although she was wealthy, the healthcare system took all of her money and they left her bankrupt, desperate, heartbroken, sicker, and probably near death. In other words, the people who should have been able to bring her to some kind of relief were the same people who took advantage of her. Instead of providing her aid, they took her money. What do? When you reach out for help, only to realize that the very people who can help are the ones who are taking advantage of you? What do? What do you do when the people whose job is to address your concerns only see you as a profit-making commodity? What do? What do you do when people see your need, but they interpret your need as an opportunity for them to exploit you? What do you do? What do you do when you reach out for help only to realize that the very people who can help you are the same people who will celebrate your demise? What do you do? The woman in Mark chapter 5 realized that she could not depend on a system to help her. Why? Because the system itself was broken and it was never designed to help her. Her experience taught her that she needed something greater than her doctor. She realized that the Israelite healthcare system was not designed to take care of her needs. It was not designed for people like her. It was not designed with her in mind. And after becoming bankrupt, after becoming frustrated, after being let down, after being disappointed, after being hurt by the system, she finally woke up. And she was able to see that depending on a system, a religious system, to help her would leave her worse off than before. This woman had had enough. She was done with the system. And when she heard about Jesus, she bypassed that system. She took matters into her own hands. She took responsibility for her own life and survival. She disregarded what everyone else had told her about what she should do because she knew within herself that it was not working because she had had enough. And when we reach that point in life, when enough is enough, we are then in a position to experience change. When we reach that point when enough is enough, it is at that moment where our faith is poised to be revolutionary. It is poised to change things. It positions us to be liberated. It positions us for things to change around us. When we reach the point where we are sick and tired of being sick and tired, we are then in a position to experience change. And when we reach that point, when we are tired of experiencing the same kind of treatment over and over again, we are in a position to then experience the possibilities of change. When we reach that point when enough is enough, we are in a unique situation for God to work God's godness within our lives and within the context of our situations. Like this woman, we too find ourselves frustrated with life in America and how the American dream is not designed for people who are black-skinned or brown-skinned or for people who happen to be women who are black. Yeah, countless times we've sought help from political leaders only to be disappointed, only to be taken advantage of, only to be left worse off than before, only to have our resources taken from us. And we too find ourselves frustrated with a system designed not to help us. But this woman took matters into her own hands. This woman believed that there was healing for her condition. She did not take no for an answer. This woman turned her back on the system and she sought something outside of a system. She then sought Jesus. People said she was terminal. People said she would not get well. People said she needed to just get over it. People said she needed to just deal with it. People said she needed to accept it and move on, but she defied the system. Truth is that no one expects minorities to have courage. No one expects us to stand up. No one expects us to value ourselves. No one expects us to have enough faith in ourselves and in the God that's in us to change the conditions in which we live. And sometimes we really don't believe in our own selves. No one in the culture would expect a woman to change an entire system. No one expected her to get her own breakthrough. No one expects those who are suffering to really have enough faith to say enough is enough. But the least expected is the one who always changes the game. The least expected is the one who always makes it out. But notice, it is her faith that changes her condition. The text says that when she heard about Jesus, she said, not that if I could shake hands with Jesus, not that if I could just hug Jesus. She said that if I could just touch the hem or the fringes of his outer garment, that something would connect the two of us because of the faith that I have and because of the power that Jesus beholds, that if I could just touch something that would connect the two of us, that something would happen in the supernatural realm that cannot be described by a radar, that cannot be described by any scientific equipment. But if I could just touch his clothes, something would channel the faith that I have with the power that is in Jesus, and it would connect us, and change will begin to happen. Notice here in the text in verse 27 that this woman had heard about Jesus' reputation. You know, Jesus did have a reputation. Some of his reputation was good and some of it was not good. And in light of what she heard about Jesus, she risked going into a crowd to touch his garment. Whatever this woman had heard about Jesus, it gave her the courage, it gave her the push, it gave her the momentum and drive to push through a crowd of sweaty, arrogant men. Because you know, women were not always allowed around men in public spaces in the ancient world. This woman risked it all. And she pushed through the crowd, and she relied on what she had heard about Jesus to push her into the one that could help her. What exactly did this woman hear about Jesus? We don't know for certain. The text doesn't say. However, we do know that Jesus had a reputation in Galilee. Yeah, we do know that he had a reputation for healing people, and he had a reputation especially for healing people with communicable impurities and diseases. We do know that Jesus had a reputation of hanging out with people that would walk up and down 3rd Avenue. Yeah. We do know that Jesus had a reputation of hanging out downtown after midnight. Yeah, we do know that Jesus had a reputation of hanging with people that we would never hang with because of fear of association. But Jesus, because he was confident in who he was, and because he knew he was on a mission, he had no concern about what people said about the kinds of people he was hanging out with. And this woman knew the reputation that Jesus had of hanging out with people that needed him the most. The fact that she goes into the crowd from behind is scandalous because she is ritually unclean, which means that if she leaves her house, she might cause someone else to become unclean. If she pushes through the crowd, she might rub elbows in the crowd and make somebody else unclean. If she pushes through the crowd, she might step on some toes and make them unclean. If she pushes through the crowd, she might bump up against someone's clothes and make them unclean. But if she does not push push through the crowd, she might never get her healing. If she doesn't push through the crowd, she might never get her liberation moment. This sister breaks all protocol. She pushes through the crowd with determination in her eyes and faith in her heart. She pushes through the crowd, comes from behind Jesus. She touches his outer garment, and as soon as she touches him at that moment, she becomes healed. Jesus looked around and said, "Who touched me?" If she had not pushed through the barriers, she would not have been healed. If she had not pushed through that which kept her outside of reaching to Jesus, she would have never been healed. When enough is enough, it positions us to take charge of our situations, to take charge of our lives, and to do something about it. Well, this sister, this unnamed black woman, how do we know she's black? Because everybody in the biblical text is black. You can't live on the north section of the African continent and not have dark skin. Come on. All right, stay with me. This unknown black sister had had enough. And when she heard about Jesus' reputation, she knew that he could heal her condition. She had faith in her ability to get to him. And because she said, if I could just touch the hem or the fringes of his garment, I could be made whole. But she also had faith that the man who was wearing the garment could heal her. She had confidence in Jesus that he alone could liberate her. She had confidence in Jesus that he alone could save her. She had confidence in Jesus that he would honor her sacrifice, her boldness. She knew that Jesus could change her situation. Why? Because she trusted in Jesus and it changed her life. She trusted in Jesus and it changed her condition. And I want to submit to you today that if we trust in God, that God is always faithful to his promises to do that which he has promised to do. As I close, there's a story about a large jetliner that was taking passengers to a destination. And on the way to the destination in the friendly skies, or sometimes not so friendly skies, this jetliner went through some terrible turbulence. And the plane began to go up and go down suddenly, without warning. What seemed like a clear day with sunny skies, with very little chance of wind issues, the plane now finds itself stressed out. The plane is shaking violently. People are sitting with their seatbelts on. The captain has put the seatbelt sign on, and now what started out as a smooth journey is now become a stressful reality. The plane is going up, it is going down, it is hitting wind pockets, it is hitting extreme turbulence. People are screaming, people are crying out, they're praying, they're hollering all over the place, and the plane is losing altitude. But everyone was frantic except the little girl. Little girl who sat directly behind the cockpit. When everything returned to normal, after the plane leveled out and as people began to calm their nerves, lady walked over to the little girl. She leaned down and she said, "I'm impressed by your calmness. Everyone else on this plane was afraid. They were scared. They were screaming out. They were hollering. They were reaching for their oxygen mask. But you sat there as if everything was all right. Why were you so calm, little girl?" The little girl replied, "I wasn't afraid. I saw everybody screaming. I saw everybody hollering. I saw everybody trying to text their loved ones and trying to write a letter of final wishes. But I wasn't afraid because my daddy was the one flying the plane. And my daddy promised me that when we took took off, that we would make it safely to our destination. And I want to submit to you today that everything that God has promised to do, that God would always make good on his promises. In fact, the songwriter, the hymn writer says, standing on the promises of Christ my King, through eternal ages, let his praises ring. Glory in the highest, I will shout and sing, standing on the promises of God. And then the songwriter began to take it on home by saying, standing on the promises of who? Of God, my Savior. I'm standing on the promises of God.